So just a quick short recap video about Roman values in the Roman Republic. This is organized in a document that you can get in the Western Civ notebook. Keep in mind the six major categories of Republican values. The first is this that we're calling it Republican values. These Latin terms, these ideas that it's important to respect the elders, mos maiorum, the idea that you almost a religious level of observance of your elders as an example for how to live in Roman life. The second idea is the idea of virtus, or manly virtue. The idea of faithfulness is described by the term fides, and that ultimately self-control, discipline, and the ability to limit displays of emotion. All of these were very important Roman values and Republican values in the days of the Roman Republic. The survival of the Republic depended, the Romans believed, on Roman citizens exhibiting and cultivating these values. During the Roman Republic, respect from your fellow citizens was of the utmost importance, and Romans continually craved and cultivated respect and status. If you got the respect of your fellow citizens, that commanded authority. And this sort of supported the idea that some Romans were destined to rule, others not. Some were just simply born with an ability to develop respect. You cultivated respect by displaying these Republican values. If you were able to show reverence for the elders and manly virtue, this almost militaristic manly virtue, if you showed faithfulness and loyalty to Rome continually, if you were completely in control and very disciplined, that would gain you the respect of your fellow citizens. Aristocrats were thought to automatically deserve respect. These were people born in special families, those families of noble distinction. If you were born into an aristocratic family, automatically you deserved respect. They would often call these families, they would refer to being a member of this family as being part of the house of. So the house of the Julii would be the family that Julius Caesar comes from, for example. Over time, cultivating this aristocratic lifestyle became very expensive because you had to continue to cultivate connections between your family and other families. So becoming wealthy mattered quite a bit. You could also become connected into aristocratic families through marriage. Marriages were a way to join the power and respect and prestige of various families. The patron-client system, which we've talked about in some significant detail, also described a particular social hierarchy that held Roman society together. The patron was a man of some significant status, and the client was a man of some lesser status. It's important to know that patrons could also be clients of even higher status patrons. But by the client pledging their loyalty to a patron, becoming obligated to a patron, created a bond where the patron would support the client, help the client with social connections, maybe even loan money to help them get a business started, lend the name and their prestige to the client when appropriate. It's almost like a job reference in some ways. And the client, in return, would pay tribute, often supporting the patron in his endeavors. Often his endeavors were to be elected to public office. They would have to make a big show of support for the patron when the patron ran for public office. This interlocking system of mutual obligations in the patron-client system and the strength and power of aristocratic families is reflected in family and cultural life. The culture of family life anyway. The Romans definitely believed that the family was the cornerstone of society and social hierarchy. Family was everything. Family is where you learned your values. The family is what provided the stability for Roman culture. And that's why we have this term social bedrock. They practiced a concept called patria potestas, which is another way of saying, is a Latin term for the father's power is what it literally means. It basically is another way of saying that this Rome was a very patriarchal society. The father in a family was the sole owner of all descendants, property. So father's son, if that son started a business, technically all the property belonged to that father. Now the son would accumulate wealth and things like that, but according to law, it all belonged to the father. Until the father of the family died, he was the sole owner of everything, including his daughters. Not just his daughters' property, but his daughters technically. The wives were under the control of their fathers, not under the control of their husbands. Women who were not, whose father was no longer alive, had a fair degree of independence. They needed a guardian, technically, oftentimes some kind of a male in their life to sponsor their activities, but this was often just considered a formality. They could own property and run their own businesses. Page 143 in the text, we analyzed that image of women running a business. In many ways, women had it better in Rome than they did in Greece. Wives would manage the household as well, just as in Greek culture. The most important role for a mother in Roman society, though, was to instill important values in children. They were the moral values, particularly, that we talked about up here. The Republican values, mos meorum virtus sin fides, self-control and discipline. That was their role. This was the cornerstone of their virtue. The better job they did instilling virtue into their children, the more virtuous they were, or at least they were considered to be. They couldn't vote, they couldn't hold office, but wealthy women could influence things behind the scenes. If they were married to important husbands, or they had children, sons who had held important offices, or who themselves had acquired some degree of power in society. Poor and working class families were very industrious, and in fact, they made most of what they needed at home. Education was a significant factor in Republican life. Men cultivated public speaking skills and ethics. Private teachers were often employed. Often they were slaves in order to help teach those ethics and public speaking skills. Very similar to Greek society in that your ability to be persuasive and speak very well in public brought you prestige and therefore often brought you victories in local elections. Women were often taught literature and music. Mostly a woman's education was focused on them being prepared to be instill moral values in their children. But it was also important for them to be appropriate and effective company in the social settings of Rome. Good conversationalist, quite honestly. And religion was super important in Roman life. We've talked about this to a large degree, that Rome's gods were based on the Greek models, and similar to the way that the Greeks looked at their gods, they needed to please the gods in order to have good fortune. Sometimes they'd even look to foreign gods if things were very difficult. Your text referred to a couple of those instances. An example of a particular Roman god that was very important was Vesta, the goddess of the family, the goddess of the hearth, which is the sort of the fireplace. And as long as Vesta was kept happy, your family would be kept in good shape, which is super important, of course, because the family is the bedrock of Roman life. Many families had a sort of almost you would say a private religion. They worshipped particular gods in their own way. Many looked at the ancestors and worshipped ancestors. Some of the wealthier families had masks and other kinds of pieces of artwork made to portray their ancestors that they then worshipped. Many different activities. There seemed to be a religious ritual to accompany almost any activity you could think of, from the harvest to breastfeeding and all sorts of things. And what's very important is being religiously observant in public mattered quite a bit in securing your reputation and status in society. So this is a quick summary of the Roman Republican values and virtues in the time of the Roman Republic. Again, this document is in Schoology, and you can look at this anytime you want to. And this document also draws on the reading from pages 138 through 145.